So back in February of 1868, Congress had passed, after Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, for his second term, he had picked Andrew Johnson, a Southern slave owner, to be his vice president. And he wanted a Southern slave owner on the ticket with him so that after the Civil War, they could present a united front. It's me, Abe Lincoln. I mobilized the Union Army and won the Civil War, and it's Andrew Johnson, my vice president, who is a Southerner and a slave owner, and former slave owner, I guess, because they were emancipated, but who is joining me, and so we are reaching out to the whole country. This was Lincoln's great idea, and it turns out it wasn't such a great idea, but in any case, Lincoln got assassinated, and Andrew Johnson wanted to do all kinds of things. But the first thing that he wanted to do was purge his cabinet of Lincoln loyalists, particularly Edwin Stanton, the Secretary of War, what we would now call the Secretary of Defense, and do so. To put in his own little toadies who would help him blow up the whole process of Reconstruction down in the South. So Congress passed a law. It was titled An Act Regulating the Tenure of Certain Civil Offices. And what this law said was that basically that if a member of the cabinet, in this case Stanton, had been approved by the Senate, after being proposed by the president, Stanton was proposed by Lincoln, he was confirmed by the Senate, that the president couldn't just fire them, that the Senate had to agree to that too. Now, that law it no longer exists, and frankly, I don't know if it was struck down by the Supreme Court or if it expired or if it got replaced, but Johnson went ahead and fired Stanton anyway and installed his own guy anyway. And most of the articles of impeachment against Andrew Johnson specifically talk about this fact, that he defied Congress. Congress passed this law. He defied Congress, and therefore he should be impeached, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But he did this, Andrew Johnson did this, he defied Congress with speeches and rallies to Southerners, of which he was one, basically, building his base, as it were, which leads us to, here, Article 9, for example, it says, boy, it is a long one. Article 9 basically, continues with this thing and talks about how, in contravention of the commission, in which provisional law, blah-de-blah, said Andrew Johnson then and there well knew, with intent thereby to induce said Emory in his official capacity as commander of the Department of Washington to violate the provisions of said act and to take and receive, act upon, and obey such orders as he, Andrew Johnson, this is the guy who replaced Stanton. So anyhow, we get to Article 10. And Article 10, that said Andrew Johnson, President of the United States, unmindful of the high duties of his office and the dignities and the proprieties thereof, and of the harmony and courtesies which ought to exist and to be maintained between the executive and legislative branches of the government of the United States, designing and intending to set aside the rightful authority and powers of Congress, did attempt to bring into disgrace, ridicule, hatred, contempt, and reproach the Congress of the United States, to impair and destroy the regard and respect of all the good people of the United States for the Congress and legislative powers thereof, and to excite the odium and resentment of all the good people of the United States against Congress and the laws by it duly and constitutionally enacted. And in pursuance of his said design and intent, openly and publicly and before diverse assemblages of the citizens of the United States, convened in diverse parts thereof to meet and receive said Andrew Johnson as the Chief Magistrate of the United States, did, on the 18th day of August in the year of our Lord 1866, and on diverse other days and times, as well before as afterward, Andrew Johnson did make and deliver with a loud voice certain intemperate, inflammatory, and scandalous harangues, and did therein utter loud threats and bitter menaces, as well against Congress as the laws of the United States duly enacted thereby, amid the cries, jeer, and laughter of the multitudes then assembled and in hearing. Period. That is the entirety of Article 10 of the impeachment of Andrew Johnson. There were 11 articles in total. Tell me this isn't like going on right now? I mean, as I said, you know, high crimes and misdemeanors, when you read the articles of impeachment against Andrew Johnson, and tip of the hat to Sue Nethercutt, who does our newsletter, who gave me the link to it yesterday on Twitter, and it wasn't until after I got off the air that I really had the time to read this. But, you know, I mean, even Article 1, right, that said Andrew Johnson, President of the United States on the 21st day of February in the year of our Lord, 1868, at Washington, the District of Columbia, unmindful of the high duties of his office, of his oath of office, and of the requirement of the Constitution that he should take care that the laws be faithfully executed, did unlawfully and in violation of the Constitution and laws of the United States issue an order in writing for the removal of Edwin Stanton from the office of Secretary of the Department of War. And, you know, and then it says, said Andrew, let me start here. Edwin M. Stanton, being then and there Secretary of the Department of War, and then and there being in due and lawful execution and discharge of the office of said office, whereby said Andrew Johnson, President of the United States, did there and then commit and was guilty of a high misdemeanor in office. And then they use that phrase over and over and over again in all these articles of impeachment. I mean, we really need to learn our history.